Preston, music. Grant didn't speed away in his Porsche. He drove slowly, checking his hair in the rear-view mirror, leaving me shivering in the dirt behind the bleachers. He laughed because he, music, knew the police chief was his uncle. He laughed because he thought I was just a helpless poor girl. He didn't know that the man I was about to call wasn't a truck driver. He was a general with the power to level cities, and he was about to turn this town into a war zone. Hit like, subscribe for more betrayal stories, and comment your city or country. The taillights of Preston's car finally disappeared around the bend, swallowed by the thick fog that always rolled off the lake this time of year. The silence that followed was worse than the noise. It was a heavy, suffocating silence. I looked down at my hands. They were shaking so hard they looked blurry. There was mud under my fingernails and a rip in my jeans that hadn't been there an hour ago. I tried to stand up, but my legs gave out. I crumpled back onto the cold wet grass, gasping for air. The air smelled like rain and pine needles. Normal smells that felt alien now. Everything had changed. The world was the same, but I wasn't. Get up, Leia, I whispered to myself, my voice sounding like grinding glass. You have to get up. I forced myself to move, one foot in front of the other. I started walking toward the main road, avoiding the streetlights. I didn't want anyone to see me. I didn't want to see the pity or the judgment in their eyes. In this town, if you crossed a Grant, it was somehow your fault. You shouldn't have been there. You shouldn't have worn that. You should have known your place. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I ignored it. It was probably Mom asking where I was. The thought of her made a fresh wave of tears burn my eyes. Mom, who worked double shifts at the diner just so I could attend this prestigious private school on a scholarship. She thought this school was my ticket out. She didn't know it was a hunting ground. By the time I reached our small peeling white house on the edge of town, I felt numb. The porch light was off. Mom was saving electricity again. I opened the door quietly, hoping to sneak into the bathroom to wash the dirt off before she saw me. But she was waiting. She was sitting at the small kitchen table, still in her diner uniform, counting out tip money. She looked up as I entered, a smile starting to form on her tired face. Hey, sweetie, I made some. The smile died instantly. She stood up so fast her chair scraped loudly against the linoleum. Her eyes scanned me. The torn clothes, the bruise forming on my cheek, the way I was holding my own arm like it was broken. Eel. Her voice was a whisper, terrified and small. I couldn't hold it in anymore. The numbness shattered. Mom. I choked out. It was Preston. Preston and his friends. I didn't have to say what they did. She saw it. She saw the destruction of her only child standing right in front of her. For a second, I thought she was going to faint. Her face went gray, but then something shifted. The exhaustion vanished from her eyes, replaced by a cold, hard, terrifying clarity. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She walked over to me, her steps silent, and pulled me into a hug that felt like a steel cage. She held me while I sobbed into her uniform, smelling like coffee and grease, the only safe smells left in the world. Did you call the police? She asked softly into my hair. No, I wept. They won't come. It's the Grants, Mom. They own everything. She pulled back, gripping my shoulders. Her eyes were dry. You're right. The police won't help. She turned and walked to the cabinet above the fridge. She reached all the way to the back, past the old cereal boxes, and pulled out a burner phone. It was an old, clunky black brick of a thing I had never seen before. Mom? I sniffled, wiping my nose. What is that? She didn't answer. She powered it on. It lit up with a green glow. She dialed a single number and put it to her ear. Oh, operator, she said. Her voice was different. It wasn't my mom's voice. It was authoritative. Commanding authentication code Zulu 9 Echo Priority 1 patch. I stared at her. My mom, who clipped coupons and apologized when people bumped into her, was speaking like a soldier. Connect me to General Adrian, she ordered. There was a pause. I don't care if he's in a war room, she snapped, her voice dropping an octave. You tell him it's Amelia. You tell him. Tell him the extraction point is compromised. Tell him they hurt his daughter. My heart stopped. General. My dad was a logistics manager. He moved boxes. He complained about back pain. Mom listened for a moment, then looked at me. Her eyes were filled with a fierce, terrifying love. He's coming, she whispered to me, lowering the phone. And God help anyone who stands in his way. Outside, thunder rumbled, shaking the window panes. But it wasn't thunder. It was the sound of a jet engine high above the clouds, banking hard toward the north. Preston Grant thought he had won. He thought he had broken me. But as I watched my mother transform from a waitress into a warrior, I realized the truth. Preston hadn't won. He had just signed his own death warrant. Mom stared at the phone for what felt like an eternity, her chest rising and falling in sharp, shallow breaths. The silence in the kitchen was so thick it felt like physical pressure against my eardrums. When the operator finally connected the line, the sound of his voice was faint, filtered through layers of secure satellite encryption, but it was undeniably him. Amelia. Just one word. But it carried a weight I had never heard in my father's voice before. It wasn't the tired, affectionate tone of the dad who asked about my geometry grades. This was cold. Precise. Adrian, Mom said. And her voice didn't waver. She didn't sound like a victim. She sounded like a handler reporting a catastrophe. It's Leia. She's been attacked. Preston Grant. It was bad. Adrian. They hurt her. I saw her knuckles turn white as she gripped the phone. She was listening to him now, her eyes fixed on a crack in the kitchen wall. I couldn't hear what he was saying, but I felt the shift in the room. The air grew colder. The police are compromised, Mom continued, cutting him off. Grant owns them. We are alone here. If you don't come, if you don't fix this, she doesn't have a future in this town. She paused again, listening. Then a single tear finally escaped, tracing a hot line down her cheek. Okay, we'll be ready. She lowered the phone and ended the call. The green light faded, leaving us back in the dim kitchen. She looked at me and for a fleeting second I saw the terror she was hiding. The sheer overwhelming fear of a mother who knows she has just started a war. But she buried it instantly. Go pack a bag, Leia, she said quietly. Just the essentials. Don't turn on the lights in your room. 7,000 miles away on a desolate tarmac in a country that didn't officially exist on civilian maps, General Adrian lowered his satellite phone. The sandstorm outside was howling against the reinforced glass of the command bunker, but the storm inside him was far more violent. He stood up slowly. The other officers in the room, men who had seen combat, men who didn't scare easily, stopped talking immediately. They saw the look on his face. It wasn't anger. Anger is hot. Anger is loud. This was absolute zero. It was the look of a man who had just decided that the rules of engagement no longer applied. General, his XO, a major named Thompson, asked cautiously, Sir, is everything all right? Adrian walked to the metal table in the center of the room and looked down at the map of the operation they had been planning for 6 months. A high-stakes extraction of a foreign asset. A mission critical to national security. He swept the map off the table with one smooth, violent motion. Papers and tablets crashed to the floor. Cancel it, Adrian said. His voice was low, a rumble of thunder before the strike. Sir, Thompson stammered, the mission launches in 2 hours. We can't just, I said, cancel it. Adrian roared, slamming his fist onto the metal table. The sound rang out like a gunshot. My mission parameters have changed. Prepare the Gulf Stream. I need a flight plan filed for the States. Immediately, Thompson stared at him, bewildered. General, you can't leave the theater. The Pentagon will have your stars for this. What could possibly be more important than this operation? Adrian turned to him. His eyes were dark voids. He reached into his tactical vest and pulled out a worn laminated photo. It was me, age 10, missing a front tooth, holding a pinwheel he had bought me at a county fair. He looked at it for a long second, his thumb brushing over my face. My daughter, Adrian whispered, the words cutting through the silence like a blade. Someone touched my daughter. He looked back up at Thompson and the major saw something in the general's eyes that made his blood run cold. It was the promise of violence so total, so complete that it would leave nothing but ash. Get me the jet, Major, Adrian commanded, walking toward the exit without looking back. And get me the encrypted line to the ghost team. I don't need soldiers for where I'm going. I need monsters. As he stepped out into the swirling sand, the wind whipping his fatigues, he didn't feel the heat of the desert. All he could feel was the phantom sensation of his hands around Preston Grant's throat. He wasn't coming home to visit. He was coming home to hunt. The morning after the attack, the sun came up over the lake like nothing had happened. It was bright, offensive, and cheerful. I watched it rise from the edge of my bed. My eyes swollen shut, my body aching in places I didn't know could ache. I hadn't slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I was back in the dirt behind the bleachers, smelling the copper and the pine, hearing the zipper of Preston's jacket. Mom had already been up for hours. I could hear her downstairs moving with a strange frantic energy. The smell of bleach was overpowering. She wasn't cleaning. She was purging. She was scrubbing the floors, the counters, the windows, erasing every speck of dust, as if she could scrub the memory of last night out of the house itself. When I finally walked down the stairs, she stopped. She was holding a mop, her knuckles white. We have to go to the police station, she said. Her voice was flat. Not because they will help, but because we have to be on the record. When your father gets here, he will need the paperwork to prove they failed. I nodded. I felt like a ghost in my own life. I put on a hoodie that was 2 sizes too big, trying to disappear inside the fabric. The drive to the precinct was silent. We passed the high school and I ducked my head, terrified that Preston or his friends might be there, laughing, watching, but the streets were empty. It was Saturday. The town was sleeping off its Friday night sins. The police station was a brick building that smelled of stale coffee and floor wax. The officer at the desk, a man named Sergeant Miller, who I had seen at every high school football game cheering for Preston, looked up from his paperwork. He didn't look concerned. He looked annoyed. "Can I help you, Amelia?" he asked, not even looking at me. "My daughter was assaulted last night," Mom said. She didn't whisper. She said it loud enough for the two other officers in the back to hear by Preston Grant, Kyle Vance, and Mason Reed. The silence that followed was immediate and heavy. Sergeant Miller slowly put down his pen. He looked at Mom, then at me, his eyes narrowing, not with sympathy, but with warning. "That's a serious accusation, Amelia," he said, his voice dropping to a low, patronizing rumble. "Preston is a good kid. Mayor Grant's boy. You sure Leia here didn't just have a regretful night? You know how teenagers get a little alcohol? A little drama?" "I wasn't drinking," I whispered, my voice trembling. "And I didn't." "We want to file a report," Mom interrupted, her voice like ice. "Now," Miller sighed, rolling his eyes as if we were wasting his time. He pulled a form from a drawer and slid it across the counter. "Fine, fill it out. But I'm telling you right now, without physical evidence or witnesses, this is just he said, she said. And around here, the mayor's word carries a lot of weight." We spent an hour filling out the forms. I had to write it all down. Every detail, every touch, every word Preston said. It felt like living it all over again, but in slow motion. When we handed it back, Miller glanced at it, tossed it into a wire basket marked pending, and went back to his coffee. "I'll look into it," he mumbled. "Don't leave town." As we walked out into the blinding sunlight, I felt a new kind of hopelessness settling in. The law wasn't broken here. It was owned, but the betrayal wasn't over. By the time we got home, my phone had blown up. I had 30 missed messages. I opened the first one from a number I didn't know. "Nice try, gold digger. Everyone knows you threw yourself at him." My stomach dropped. I opened the next one. "Trying to ruin the captain's season. Watch your back, trash." I scrolled through Instagram. It was everywhere. A narrative had already been spun. Someone, probably Kyle, had posted a picture of me from a party 3 months ago holding a red Solo cup, laughing. The caption read, "Lila loves the attention. Don't believe the lies. She's just mad Preston rejected her." The comments were accessible. People I had known since kindergarten. Teachers I had respected. Neighbors who waved at us. They were all liking it, sharing it, calling me a liar, a schemer trying to get a payout from the mayor. "Mom." I choked out, showing her the phone. She looked at the screen, her eyes scanning the hate. She didn't get angry. She got quieter. She took the phone from my hand and powered it off. "Let them talk," she said softly. "Let them dig their graves a little deeper. Every lie they tell now is just more ammunition for him." "For who?" I asked, tears streaming down my face. "Dad? Mom? He's one man. He can't fight the whole town. The mayor, the police, the school, they're all against us." Mom walked to the window and looked up at the sky. The clouds were gathering again, dark and heavy, moving in from the north. "He isn't coming alone, Leia," she said. "You don't understand who your father is. You think he manages trucks? He manages wars." She turned back to me and for the first time in 2 days, a small terrifying smile played on her lips. "And he doesn't fight fair." That night, the news broke locally. Channel 4, the station Mayor Grant practically owned, ran a segment on teenage pranks gone wrong. They didn't name me, but they mentioned a false allegation against the town star athletes. They interviewed Mayor Grant. He stood on his manicured lawn looking fatherly and concerned. "It's a shame," he told the camera, shaking his head. "We try to help these families from the lower income brackets. Give them scholarships. Give them a chance. And this is the thanks we get. Lies and blackmail. My son is the victim here." I watched from the couch wrapped in a blanket, feeling like I was shrinking. I wanted to disappear. I wanted to die. But then the phone rang. Not the burner phone. The house phone. Mom picked it up. She listened for a second, then handed it to me. "It's him," she said. I took the receiver, my hand shaking. "Dad." "Leia." His voice was crystal clear. It sounded close. "I'm at the airfield. I'm 40 minutes out." "Dad, everyone hates me." I sobbed, the words spilling out. "The police, the news, they're all lying. They said I wanted it." "Lila, listen to me," he said. His voice wasn't comforting. It was anchoring. It stopped my shaking. "Do not look at the news. Do not look at your phone. What they are saying is noise. It doesn't matter." "But they won," I whispered. "They already won." "No," he said, "they haven't won. They've just made the target list bigger." I heard a sound in the background of the call. A deep rhythmic thumping. It sounded like rotor blades. "I'm not coming in the sedan, Leia," he said, his voice dropping to a growl. "I'm bringing the team. Close the blinds. Lock the doors and wait for the thunder." The line clicked dead. I looked at Mom. She was already at the window closing the heavy drapes. She moved with precision, checking the locks, turning off the porch light. We sat in the darkness of the living room, the silence stretching out. Then we heard it. At first, it was just a vibration in the floorboards, then a low hum, then a roar that shook the picture frames on the walls. I ran to the window and peeked through the crack in the curtains. 2 black SUVs with tinted windows were tearing down our street, moving in perfect formation. They didn't slow down for the speed bumps. They swerved into our driveway, tires screeching, boxing in the front of the house. The doors flew open for men stepped out. They weren't police. They weren't soldiers in uniform. They wore plainclothes, dark jackets, cargo pants, boots. But they moved like predators. They scanned the street, the trees, the rooftops in a single fluid motion. And then the driver's door of the lead vehicle opened. My dad stepped out. He looked the same, but entirely different. He was wearing a black tactical vest over a gray t-shirt. He had a headset around his neck. He didn't look at the house. He looked at the street at the neighbor peering out from behind their blinds. He stared right at them until the neighbor's blind snapped shut. He walked up the path to our front door, flanked by the 4 men. I opened the door before he could knock. He filled the doorway. He looked tired, his eyes rimmed with red stubble on his jaw. He looked at me, really looked at me, taking in the bruise, the fear, the way I was holding myself. He didn't say a word. He stepped inside and wrapped his arms around me. He smelled like jet fuel and stale coffee. I buried my face in his chest and finally, for the first time since the attack, I felt safe. "I'm here," he whispered into my hair, "and I brought hell with me." The door closed behind them, shutting out the world. The house, usually so quiet you could hear the refrigerator hum, suddenly felt small. It was filled with a kind of energy I had never experienced before. Kinetic, dangerous, and incredibly controlled. General Adrian, my dad, stood in the center of our living room. He didn't take off his tactical vest. He didn't sit down. He looked at the peeling wallpaper, the worn carpet, and the stack of unpaid bills on the counter. His jaw tightened, a muscle feathering near his ear. It wasn't judgment. It was guilt. He had been away fighting other people's wars while his own castle was crumbling. "Clear the perimeter," he said quietly to the men. Without a word, 3 of the men vanished into the rest of the house. 1 went to the back door, 1 to the kitchen, and 1 upstairs. They moved silently, checking windows, scanning for bugs, securing the space. The 4th man, the one Dad had called Major Thompson, stayed by the door, arms crossed, his eyes scanning the street through the peephole. Dad finally turned to Mom. She was standing by the kitchen island, her arms wrapped around herself, trembling slightly now that the adrenaline was fading. He walked over to her and took her hands. His touch was gentle, a stark contrast to the lethal precision with which he had just entered. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice rough. "I should have been here." "You're here now," Mom whispered, leaning her forehead against his chest. He held her for a moment, then turned his attention to me. He walked over to the couch where I was sitting, still wrapped in the blanket. He knelt down on one knee, so he was eye level with me. Up close, he looked older than I remembered. There were new lines around his eyes, gray in his beard, but his eyes were the same, intense, piercing blue. "Lila," he said, "I need you to tell me everything. I know you told the police. I know you told your mother, but I need you to tell me." "It hurts to talk about it," I whispered. "I know," he said, "but the police report is a lie. The news is a lie. I need the truth so I can dismantle them piece by piece." So I told him. I told him about the party I didn't want to go to, about how Preston offered me a ride home, about the detour to the woods behind the school, about the laugh, the smell of the dirt, the way Kyle and Mason held me down while Preston I couldn't finish the sentence. I broke down, sobbing into my hands. Dad didn't flinch. He didn't look away. He listened to every word, absorbing the horror of it. He didn't offer empty platitudes. He didn't say, "It's going to be okay." He just nodded, his face hardening into a mask of stone. When I was done, he stood up. He walked over to Major Thompson. "Get the team on the comms," he said. "I want a full digital workup on Preston Grant, Kyle Vance, and Mason Reed. I want their parents' financials. I want their phone records. I want to know where they buy their coffee and who they cheat on their taxes with. I want everything." "Yes, General," Thompson said, tapping his earpiece. "And Thompson," Dad added, his voice dropping to a whisper that carried across the room, "find out which judge signed the warrant to bury the evidence. Consider it done." Dad turned back to us. "We're not staying here tonight. It's not secure. They know where you live." "Where are we going?" Mom asked, looking around at the only home she had known for 20 years. "I've set up a command post," Dad said. "Old logistics hub outside of town. It's off the grid." "Dad," I asked, wiping my eyes, "what are you going to do?" He looked at me, and for a second, the soldier vanished, and I just saw a father who was in pain. But then the soldier returned colder and more terrifying than before. "I'm going to visit the crime scene," he said. "The police already cleared it," I said. "They said there was nothing there." The police looked with their eyes closed, he said. I'm going to look with mine open. He motioned for the men. We move in 5. Pack the car. 20 minutes later, we were in the back of one of the black SUVs, speeding toward the edge of town. But instead of going to the safe house, Dad had the driver pull over near the school. It was dark now. The football field was empty, the bleachers rising like skeletal ribs against the night sky. Stay in the car, he ordered. He got out alone. I watched him through the tinted glass. He moved through the shadows, blending into the darkness. He walked to the spot behind the bleachers, the spot that haunted my nightmares. He didn't just look around. He got on his hands and knees. He took out a high-powered tactical flashlight and began to grid the ground inch by inch. He was looking for something the local cops, in their haste to protect the mayor's son, had been too lazy or too corrupt to find. He spent an hour out there digging in the mud, sifting through the leaves. Suddenly, he stopped. He reached into a patch of tall grass near the fence line. He pulled something out. It glinted in the flashlight beam. He stood up, brushing the dirt off his knees. He held the object up to the light, inspecting it closely. Then, he took out a small evidence bag from his pocket, dropped the object inside, and sealed it. He walked back to the car. When he opened the door, the interior light flooded his face. He looked grim, but there was a flicker of triumph in his eyes. "What is it?" Mom asked. He held up the bag. Inside was a gold cufflink custom-made, heavy and engraved with initials. "It's not Preston's," Dad said. "Brian wears cheap stuff trying to look rich. This is real gold." "Whose is it?" I asked. "It belongs to the third kid," Dad said. "Mason Reed. His father is the developer who built this stadium, and he just made the biggest mistake of his life." He tapped the glass of the partition, separating us from the driver. "Get us to the command post," he said. "We have our first thread. Now we pull it until the whole sweater unravels." As the car sped away, I looked back at the school one last time. For the first time, I didn't feel fear. I felt something else. I felt the beginning of the end for them. The general was home and he had ammunition. The old logistics hub was a relic from the Cold War. A concrete bunker buried halfway into a hillside about 10 miles north of town. Most people thought it was just an abandoned storage facility for the Department of Transportation. They were wrong. As our SUV rolled up to the rusted chain-link fence, the gates didn't just open. They slid back with the heavy hydraulic groan of reinforced steel. Inside, the air changed. The humidity of the summer night was replaced by the sterile, conditioned chill of a military command center. Dad led us inside. The space was buzzing, not with noise, but with the silent, terrifying efficiency of digital warfare. 3 rows of desks had been set up in the center of the concrete floor. Monitors glowed with streams of data, satellite feeds, scrolling lines of bank transactions, and live surveillance footage. The men Dad had brought with him were already working, their fingers flying across keyboards. "Sit," Dad said, pointing to a leather couch in the corner. "You're safe here. This facility doesn't exist on any county map." Mom sat down, but I couldn't. I walked over to the nearest screen. It showed a live feed of a house I recognized immediately. It was the mayor's mansion. I could see the pool, the guest house, even the light flickering in Preston's bedroom window. "We have eyes on all of them," Major Thompson said, appearing beside me. He didn't look at me with pity. He looked at me like I was a mission objective. "Grant, Vance, Reed, we're tracking their phones, their cars, and their internet traffic." "Why?" I asked. "What are you looking for?" "Leverage," Dad answered, walking over to the main display wall. He pinned the evidence bag with the gold cufflink onto a corkboard. "We know who hurt you, Leia, but in a town like this, proving it isn't enough. We have to destroy their ability to fight back." He turned to the room. "Report." A man with glasses and a sleeve of tattoos spun his chair around. "General, we've cracked the developer's financials. Mason Reed's father. He's moving money through shell companies in the Cayman Islands. It looks like construction kickbacks." "Tie it to the mayor," Dad ordered. "Already did," the man said, smirking. "Mayor Grant's signature is on the zoning permits for every single one of Reed's projects. And get this, there's a recurring monthly payment from Reed's personal account to a consulting firm owned by the mayor's wife." "Bribery," Mom whispered from the couch. "Systemic corruption," Dad corrected. "They've been running this town like a personal piggy bank for a decade." "What about the police?" Dad asked. Another analyst spoke up. "Sergeant Miller, the one who took your report? His mortgage was paid off in full 2 days ago. Cash deposit." Dad's eyes went cold. "By who?" "A generic LLC," the analyst said. "But I traced the IP address used to set up the transfer. It resolves to the mayor's home office." The room went silent. This wasn't just about a high school assault anymore. This was a federal crime ring. "They paid him off," I said, my voice shaking. "They paid him to ignore me." Dad walked over to me and put a hand on my shoulder. "They paid him to bury the truth. But they didn't know we brought shovels." He turned back to the team. "We have the motive. We have the money trail now. We need the connection to the assault. We need to know why they were so desperate to silence Leia specifically. Sir, Major Thompson interrupted, holding up a tablet. I think you need to see this. We just decrypted Preston's cloud backups. Dad took the tablet. He swiped through a few images, his face hardening with every second. Then he stopped. He looked at the screen for a long time, his expression unreadable. What is it? Mom asked, standing up. Dad didn't answer her. He looked at me. Eel. The night of the party. Did you hear them talking about anything? Before it happened, I closed my eyes, trying to push past the trauma, trying to remember the words through the fog of fear. They were arguing, I whispered. Mason was mad at Preston. He said, my dad is going to kill us if she finds out. And Preston laughed and said, she's a nobody. She won't understand what she saw. What did you see, Leia? Dad asked urgently. Think. I walked in on them in the study. I said, the memory flashing back. I was looking for the bathroom. They were all crowded around a laptop. They slammed it shut when I came in, but I saw a map. It had red lines all over it. Dad looked at the tablet again, then back at the main screen. Pull up the zoning map for the new highway project, he ordered. The screen shifted. A digital map of the town appeared. A thick red line cut right through the north side of town, directly through the poorest neighborhood. Our neighborhood? They aren't just stealing money, Dad said, his voice low and dangerous. They're planning to bulldoze the entire low-income district to build a private access road for Reed's new luxury resort. And they were using the school's renovation budget to fund the initial surveys. That's illegal. Mom said that's displacement fraud. It's worse. Major Thompson said, if this gets out, the federal grants the town received for the school would be audited. They'd all go to prison for 20 years. Dad looked at me. You didn't just walk in on a party, Leia. You walked in on a conspiracy worth $50 million. That's why they hurt you. That's why they tried to scare you into silence. It wasn't just cruelty. It was a cleanup operation. A chill ran down my spine. They hadn't just attacked me because they could. They attacked me because I was a liability. So, what do we do? I asked. Dad turned to the big screen where the faces of the mayor, the developer, and the police chief were displayed. He picked up a marker and drew a big red X over the developer's face. We divide and conquer, he said. Mason Reed is the weak link. He has the most to lose. And his son left a cufflink at the scene. He turned to the analyst with the tattoos. Freeze Reed's assets. Every bank account, every credit card, every offshore holding. I want him to wake up tomorrow unable to buy a cup of coffee. And then Mom asked. And then Dad said, checking his watch. I'm going to pay him a visit. It's time he learned that money can't buy protection from a predator. He walked to a metal cabinet against the wall and unlocked it. Inside were rows of tactical gear. He pulled out a black windbreaker with no insignia and a pair of leather gloves. Stay here, he told us. Major Thompson has the con. Where are you going? I asked, terrified he was going to do something that would take him away from us forever. He stopped at the door and looked back. The shadows covered his eyes, making him look less like my father and more like the weapon the government had trained him to be. I'm going to knock on a door, he said. And I'm going to make sure Mason Reed knows that the monster under his bed is real. The drive to Mason Reed's estate took us through the winding roads of the wealthy district, where the streetlights were decorative iron lanterns and the driveways were long enough to land a plane on. Dad didn't speak. He sat in the front seat, staring out at the dark woods, his tactical gloves creaking slightly as he flexed his hands. I sat in the back with Mom. She was holding my hand so tight my fingers were numb. But I didn't pull away. I needed to feel her there. I needed to know this was real. General, the driver said, slowing down as we approached a massive row-iron gate. We have a visual on the target. 2 security guards at the perimeter. Private contractors, do not engage unless fired upon, Dad said calmly. We aren't here to kill them. We're here to wake them up. The SUV stopped at the intercom box. A voice crackled through the speaker, bored and arrogant. Private residence, turn around. Dad rolled down the window. He didn't yell. He didn't threaten. He simply held up his military ID to the camera. General Adrian to see Mr. Reed regarding a matter of national security. He said, open the gate or I'll have this vehicle drive through it. There was a long pause. Then the heavy gates began to swing open. We rolled up the driveway, gravel crunching under the tires. The house was a mansion, pillars, balconies, a fountain in the center of the circular drive. It looked like a palace built on the suffering of people like us. Dad got out first. He walked up the steps and rang the doorbell. Mason Reed answered it himself. He was wearing a silk robe and holding a glass of whiskey. He looked annoyed, like we were interrupting something important. But when he saw a Dad, 6'2", tactical vest, eyes like granite, his annoyance flickered into confusion. Can I help you? Reed asked, swirling his drink. I assume you're lost. Mason Reed? Dad asked. That's me. And who the hell are you? Dad didn't introduce himself. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the evidence bag. He held up the gold cufflink, letting it dangle in front of Reed's face. Reed's face went pale. He recognized it instantly. The whiskey in his glass trembled. "I believe you lost this," Dad said. "Or rather, your son did while he was assaulting my daughter." Reed's eyes darted to the SUVs behind Dad, then back to the cufflink. He tried to recover his composure, forcing a laugh that sounded brittle. "I don't know what you're talking about. My son has plenty of cufflinks. That could be anyone's." "It has his initials," Dad said softly. "And it has DNA on it. But we aren't here to talk about jewelry, Mr. Reed. We're here to talk about the $50 million you're laundering through the Cayman Islands." The glass slipped from Reed's hand. It shattered on the porch, amber liquid splashing over his expensive slippers. You can't," Reed stammered, stepping back. "Who are you?" "I'm the man who just froze your assets," Dad said, stepping into the doorway, forcing Reed to retreat into his own foyer. "As of 10 minutes ago, your accounts at First National are locked. Your offshore shell companies have been flagged by the Treasury Department. You can't buy a pack of gum right now, let alone a judge." Reed backed up against a marble table, his face sweating. "This is harassment. I'll call the mayor. I'll have you arrested." "Call him," Dad challenged. "Please, I want him to know I'm here." Dad pulled out his phone and tapped the screen. "But before you do, you should know that my team just sent a little package to the IRS and the FBI and the local news stations in the capital." He turned the phone around so Reed could see the screen. It was an email draft attached with PDF files of bank statements, zoning permits, and wire transfers. "The send button has already been pressed," Dad said cold. "The first domino just fell. Mason, you have about 20 minutes before your phone starts ringing off the hook, and it won't be your friends calling. It will be federal agents." Reed looked like he was going to be sick. He slumped against the wall, the fight draining out of him. "What do you want?" he whispered. "I want the truth," Dad said, leaning in close. "I want you to tell me exactly what the mayor is planning. I want you to tell me who gave the order to silence my daughter. And if you lie to me, if you leave out a single detail, I will make sure you spend the rest of your life in a cell so small you can't stand up in it." Reed looked at Dad, then out past him to the SUV where I was watching. He looked at me, really saw me, and realized that the girl he thought was trash had just brought an army to his doorstep. "It was Grant," Reed choked out, his voice trembling. "It was all Grant. He told the boys to scare her. He said if she talked about the map, the whole deal would collapse. He said to make sure she was too ashamed to speak." Dad nodded slowly. "He told them to hurt her. He told them to break her," Reed admitted, tears of fear welling in his eyes. Dad turned around and walked back down the steps. He didn't look back at Reed, who was now sliding down the wall to the floor, weeping into his hands. Dad got back into the car. The interior light was off, but I could feel the heat radiating off him. "He gave us the mayor," Dad said to Major Thompson. "We have the testimony." "What now?" Mom asked. Dad looked at the mansion one last time as we pulled away. "Now," he said, "we take the head off the snake." The sun hadn't even risen when the next phase began. We were back at the bunker, but the mood had shifted from analysis to execution. Dad was standing at the main console, a headset on one ear, directing traffic like a conductor of chaos. "Bank authorizations are frozen," an analyst reported. "Mason Reed just tried to transfer $2 million to a Swiss account. We flagged it as terrorist financing. The account is locked." "Good," Dad said. "Now for the muscle." He turned to the large screen where Sergeant Miller's face was displayed. "This man thinks he's untouchable because he has a badge," Dad said to the room. "He thinks the law is a shield he can hide behind while he sells justice to the highest bidder. Today, we strip that shield away." I watched as Dad's team began to pull apart Miller's life. It wasn't just the mortgage payoff. They found gambling debts. They found emails to a local book he sent from his police cruiser's laptop. They found dashcam footage from 3 years ago that had been lost. Footage of him taking an envelope of cash from one of Mayor Grant's associates during a traffic stop. "We have enough to indict him," Major Thompson said. "Indictment takes too long," Dad replied, his voice hard. "I want him broken. I want him to turn on Grant before the sun comes up." He looked at me. "Lila, I need you to be brave. I'm going to make a call. I want you to listen." He dialed the precinct's main line, but he didn't patch it through the normal channels. He hacked into their internal dispatch system. Suddenly, the audio from the police station filled the bunker. We could hear phones ringing, officers talking, the coffee machine hissing. "Dispatch, this is Unit 4. A voice crackled. "Sergeant Miller, I'm 10 to 8, heading to the Doet shop." Dad pressed a button on his console. "Negative. Unit 4. This is General Adrian. You are to return to the precinct immediately." There was silence on the line. Then a shaky laugh. "Who is this?" "This is a restricted channel. Identify yourself." "I'm the man looking at your bank account," Dad said, his voice echoing through the police radio system. "The one with the $50,000 deposit from Grant Consulting." I'm also the man looking at the dashcam footage from August 12, 2022. We heard the siren on Miller's car chirp, then silence. He had pulled over. You listen to me, Dad continued, his voice dropping to a lethal whisper. I have a team of federal auditors reviewing every arrest you've made in the last 5 years. I have your emails. I have your texts. I have the GPS data showing you parked outside the mayor's house the night my daughter was attacked. I was just doing my job, Miller stammered, panic seeping into his voice. Your job was to protect her, Dad roared, the sound vibrating the speakers in the bunker. Instead, you sold her out for a mortgage payment. It wasn't me, Miller screamed back. It was the chief. He told me to bury it. He said if I didn't, they'd find a reason to fire me. There it is, Dad said calmly, looking at the team. Record that. We got it, General. The audio technician nodded. Miller, Dad said into the mic, you have exactly one chance to stay out of federal prison. You're going to walk into the chief's office wearing a wire and you're going to get him to admit that Mayor Grant ordered the cover-up. If you do that, maybe I'll let you keep your pension. If you don't, I will personally handle your file to the Department of Justice. I'll do it. Miller wept. I'll do it. Just don't release the tapes. Dad cut the feed. He took off the headset and looked at Mom. The police are neutralized, he said. Miller will turn on the chief. The chief will panic and call the mayor and the mayor. The mayor will try to run. Mom finished. Let him try, Dad said. I have a drone sitting over his house at 20,000 feet. He can't move a muscle without me knowing. But the psychological warfare wasn't just for the adults. Major Dad said, it's time for the boys. Major Thompson nodded and typed a command. Executing Protocol Glasshouse on the screen. 3 new windows popped up. They were the smartphones of Preston, Kyle, and Mason. We just pushed a little update to their phones, Thompson explained to me. It changes their wallpaper. I watched as the screens on the monitor changed. Instead of their cool car photos or selfies, their backgrounds were now a single terrifying image, the official U.S. Army seal with the words under federal investigation stamped in red across the center. Then their group chat, the one they used to laugh about me, was flooded, not with texts, but with files. Dad's team uploaded every piece of evidence we had directly into their chat. The cufflink photo, the bank transfers, the audio recording of Miller confessing. We watched the read receipts tick up. Read by Preston, read by Kyle, read by Mason. Then the messages started flying. Mason, what is this? Is this real? Kyle, my dad just got a call from the FBI. He's freaking out. Preston, shut up. It's fake. It's just a hacker. Then a new message appeared in their chat. It came from a number simply labeled the General. It is not fake, and I am not a hacker. I am the father of the girl you hurt. Look out your window. On the satellite feed, we saw 3 black SUVs, unmarked, ominous, roll slowly past each of their houses. They didn't stop. They just drove by slow and heavy like sharks circling in the water. In the chat, the panic was total. Kyle, they're outside. Oh my God, they're outside. Mason, I'm out. I'm telling them everything. I'm not going to jail for you. Preston, don't you dare. My dad will kill you. Mason, your dad can't save us. Did you see who that is? That's the Army. Dad watched the screen, his arms crossed. He wasn't smiling. This wasn't a game to him. It was a dismantling. They're turning on each other. I whispered, feeling a strange mix of vindication and awe. Fear is a powerful motivator, Dad said quietly. But we aren't done yet. Preston is still arrogant. He thinks his father can fix this. He turned to Major Thompson. Prepare the convoy. The mayor is going to try a Hail Mary play. He's going to try to arrest me for harassment. And when he does, I want to be ready to show him what real power looks like. Convoy is standing by. General assets are rolled out. Dad looked at me. Lila, get your coat. We're going into town. I want you to see this. See what? I asked. The end of his reign, Dad said. And the beginning of yours. The town square, usually sleepy at this hour, was bathed in an eerie strobe-like light. As our SUV rounded the corner, I gasped. The perimeter around City Hall had been transformed. Dad wasn't bluffing. A convoy of tactical vehicles, not the black SUVs we had arrived in, but heavy desert tan trucks with mounted satellite dishes and reinforced armor, had parked in a diamond formation right in the middle of Main Street. They didn't block traffic. They were the traffic. Stay in the car, Dad said, adjusting his vest. Keep the engine running. He stepped out into the night air. Major Thompson and 4 other operators flanked him. They walked toward the steps of City Hall with a synchronized terrifying calm. I watched through the window, my heart hammering against my ribs. A crowd was starting to gather on the sidewalks. Locals in pajamas, teenagers filming with phones, shop owners peering through blinds. They whispered, pointed. The whispers weren't about poor Leia anymore. They were about the invasion. Suddenly, the doors of City Hall burst open. Mayor Grant marched out, red-faced and flanked by two nervous-looking deputies. He was wearing a suit, but his tie was crooked, his composure cracking. "What is the meaning of this?" Grant bellowed, trying to project authority over the hum of the military engines. "You can't park these. These were machines in my town. This is a violation of municipal code." Dad stopped at the bottom of the stairs. He looked up at Grant like a lion, looking at a mouse that had wandered into its den. "I'm not here for the municipal code, Mr. Mayor," Dad said, his voice amplified by a loudspeaker on one of the trucks booming across the square. "I'm here for the Federal Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act." The crowd gasped. The word RICO hung in the air like smoke. "You have no jurisdiction," Grant shouted, sweating under the glare of the truck's floodlights. "I am the elected official of this district. I'll have you court-martialed for this stunt." "Jurisdiction?" Dad repeated, taking a step up the stairs. "You lost your jurisdiction the moment you used federal education grants to launder money for a private resort. You lost it when you ordered your police chief to tamper with evidence in a felony assault case. You lost it when you threatened my family." Grant took a step back. That's slander. "You have no proof." Dad raised his hand. Behind him, on the side of the largest truck, a projector beam snapped on. It cast a massive image onto the white brick wall of the library across the street. It was a video. The dashcam footage, Sergeant Miller taking the envelope of cash. The crowd erupted. People were shouting, pointing. Then the image changed. It was a bank statement. Grant Consulting LLC. Deposit $50,000. "Is that slander?" Dad asked, his voice calm but cutting. "Or is that a felony?" Grant looked at the wall, then at the crowd. He saw his neighbors, his voters, looking at him with disgust. He saw the end of his career, but he still had one card left to play. Or so he thought. "Arrest him." Grant screamed at the deputies. "Arrest him for trespassing. Get him out of here." The deputies looked at Grant. Then they looked at Dad. They looked at the operators standing behind Dad, hands resting casually near their holsters. They looked at the tactical trucks. One of the deputies slowly unbuckled his gun belt. He took it off and laid it on the concrete step. "I quit," the deputy said, walking away into the crowd. Grant stood alone. The silence that followed was absolute. Dad walked up the remaining steps until he was face-to-face with the mayor. "Your son," Dad said, his voice low enough that only the microphones picked it up. "Where is he?" "He's at home," Grant whispered, defeated. "No," Dad said, "he's not." At that moment, a siren wailed in the distance. Not a police siren, a federal siren. 3 black sedans with flashing blue lights screeched into the square. Agents in windbreakers with FBI emblazoned on the back jumped out. They weren't coming for Dad. They ran up the stairs, past Dad, and grabbed Mayor Grant. "Grant," one of the agents shouted, "you are under arrest for wire fraud, obstruction of justice, and conspiracy to commit money laundering." As they cuffed him, another car pulled up. The back door opened and Preston Grant was pulled out by 2 agents. He wasn't wearing his varsity jacket. He was wearing handcuffs. He looked small, terrified. He looked like a child who had finally realized the world didn't belong to him. Dad turned and walked back down the stairs. The crowd parted for him, not out of fear, but out of respect. He walked to our car and opened the door. "It's over, Leia," he said. But as I looked at Preston being shoved into the back of a federal car crying for his dad who couldn't help him, I realized something. "No," I said, shaking my head. "It's not over. They still have to answer for what they did to me." Dad looked at me, surprised by the steel in my voice. "The trial," I said. "I want to testify. I want to look them in the eye when they go away." Dad smiled. It was a small, tired, proud smile. "Then get ready," he said, "because that's going to be the hardest battle yet." The weeks leading up to the trial were a blur of depositions, federal agents in suits, and late-night strategy sessions in our kitchen. The media circus had moved on from local prank gone wrong to national corruption scandal. The trucks were gone from the town square, but the soldiers or men who looked like them were still watching. Dad made sure of that. The morning of the trial, the sky was a bruised purple, heavy with rain that refused to fall. I stood in front of the mirror in my bedroom, smoothing down the black dress Mom had bought me. It was simple, modest armor for a different kind of battlefield. Dad knocked on the doorframe. He wasn't wearing his tactical vest today. He was wearing a charcoal suit, tailored and sharp, but he still looked dangerous. He looked like a coiled spring. "You ready?" he asked, his voice soft but steady. "I'm scared," I admitted, turning to face him. "Preston has the best lawyers money can buy. What if they twist it? What if they make the jury believe I asked for it?" Dad walked over and placed his hands on my shoulders. "They can't twist the truth, Leia. Not with the evidence we have. And remember, you aren't walking in there alone. You have the United States government behind you. You have your mother and you have me." The courthouse was a fortress. Barricades had been set up to hold back the reporters. As we walked up the steps, cameras flashed like lightning. I kept my head down, focusing on Dad's shoes clicking against the concrete. Inside, the air was stale and cold. The courtroom was packed. Every seat was filled. Locals, journalists, and in the front row, the families of the accused. I saw them immediately. Preston, Kyle, and Mason sat at the defense table. They looked different. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a pale, hollow fear. They wore suits that looked too big for them. Preston wouldn't look at me. He stared at the table, his leg bouncing nervously. The prosecutor, a woman named Eleanor Vance, no relation to Kyle, was a shark. Dad had handpicked her. She didn't pace. She stalked. All rise. The me. The judge entered. A federal judge brought in from another district because every local judge had recused themselves. Judge Harland was an older man with eyes that had seen everything and was impressed by nothing. The opening arguments were brutal. Preston's lawyer, a slick man from New York named Mr. Sterling, tried to paint the boys as victims of a political witch hunt orchestrated by an overzealous military father. These are boys, Sterling argued, gesturing to the defendants, promising young men with bright futures. And because of a misunderstanding at a party, their lives are being destroyed by the full weight of the federal government. Where is the physical evidence of a crime? Where are the witnesses? I felt my stomach knot. He was good. He was making the jury look at them as children, not predators. But then it was our turn. Eleanor Vance stood up. She didn't shout. She didn't wave her arms. She simply walked to the podium and placed a single flash drive on it. "We aren't here to talk about misunderstandings," she began, her voice cutting through the room. "We are here to talk about a systematic destruction of a young girl's life funded by stolen taxpayer money and covered up by corrupt officials." She called her first witness, Sergeant Miller. Miller looked wrecked. He was sweating, his eyes darting around the room. He had taken the deal. He told the jury everything. The call from the chief, the envelope of cash, the instructions to lose my statement. The jury whispered. I saw a woman in the back row shake her head in disgust, but Sterling tore him apart on cross-examination. "You're an admitted felon. Sergeant Miller, you accepted bribes. You lied on police reports. Why should this jury believe a single word you say now? You're just saying what the government wants you to say to save your own skin, aren't you?" Miller stammered. "I'm telling the truth now." "Are you?" Sterling sneered. "Or are you just a liar who got caught?" My heart sank. Sterling was planting doubt. He was making it look like a conspiracy against the boys. We needed something undeniable. "The prosecution calls Leia," Vance announced. The room went dead silent. I stood up. My legs felt like jelly. I walked to the stand, feeling hundreds of eyes on me. I swore to tell the truth. I sat down. "Lila," Vance said gently, "tell the jury what happened that night." I took a breath. I looked at Dad. He nodded just once. I told them. I didn't use the script I had practiced. I just spoke. I told them about the cold, the smell of the dirt, the way they laughed, the way I begged. I told them about the walk home, the shame, the feeling that I was dirty and broken. I saw jurors crying. I saw the judge looking down at his notes, his jaw tight. But Sterling was waiting. He stood up for cross-examination. He smiled a predatory fake smile. "Lila," he said, "you went to the party voluntarily, didn't you?" "Yes," I whispered. "And you were drinking?" "I had a soda at a high school party." He raised an eyebrow. "Come on, Leia. Everyone was drinking. Isn't it possible your memory is a little fuzzy?" "No," I said firmly. "Isn't it true?" He continued, stepping closer. "That you had a crush on Preston? That you were angry he didn't want a relationship with you? Isn't this whole story just revenge for a broken heart?" "Objection!" Vance shouted, badgering the witness. "I'm establishing motive." Sterling shot back. "No," I shouted, surprising myself. The room froze. It wasn't revenge. He hurt me. He hurt me because he thought he could get away with it. He thought because his dad was the mayor, I didn't matter. Sterling smirked. "So, you admit you were focused on his father's status?" He was twisting everything. I felt trapped. I felt like I was back behind the bleachers, unable to breathe. But then the doors at the back of the courtroom opened. Dad stood up. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking at the defense table. "Your Honor," Vance interrupted, looking at her phone, which had just buzzed. "The prosecution requests a brief recess. New evidence has just arrived." Judge Harland looked annoyed. "This is highly irregular, Miss Vance." "It is highly relevant, Your Honor," she insisted. "It changes everything." The judge granted a 10-minute recess. Dad walked over to the prosecution table. He handed Vance a small digital recorder. "Where did you get this?" she whispered, her eyes widening. "Mason Reed," Dad said grimly. "The father," he cracked. "He gave us his son's cloud password." When court resumed, the mood had shifted. Vance looked like a hunter who had just cornered her prey. "Your Honor," she said, "we would like to enter Exhibit G into evidence, an audio file recovered from the defendant Mason Reed's personal cloud storage." It was recorded on his phone the night of the incident. Sterling jumped up. Objection. We haven't heard this. This is ambush trial tactics overruled. Judge Harlan said, play it. The bailiff pressed play on the laptop connected to the courtroom speakers. Static hiss. Then voices. Young, drunk, arrogant voices. Dude, did you see her face? It was Preston. His voice was unmistakable. She was crying like a baby. You think she'll talk? That was Kyle. Who cares? Preston laughed. That same jagged laugh that haunted my dreams. My dad owns the cops. Besides, who's going to believe the scholarship trash over us? We just put her in her place. She needed to learn not to snoop around where she doesn't belong. I don't know, man, Mason's voice said, sounding nervous. She saw the map. If she talks about the road, she won't, Preston snapped. I made sure she was too scared to talk. We broke her. The recording ended. The silence in the courtroom was absolute. It was heavier than the silence in the bunker. It was the silence of the grave. I looked at Preston. He wasn't bouncing his leg anymore. He was staring at the table, his face the color of ash. Sterling, his lawyer, was slowly closing his notebook. He knew it was over. We broke her, Vance repeated, letting the words hang in the air. Those were your words, Preston. You broke her. She turned to the jury. They didn't just assault her. They confessed to it. They bragged about it. And they admitted the motive was to cover up a multi-million-dollar fraud scheme. She sat down. Sterling didn't ask any more questions. He didn't even look at the jury. The closing arguments were short. The jury deliberated for less than an hour. When they came back, the foreman, a mechanic with grease under his fingernails, stood up. He wouldn't look at the defendants. He looked right at me. On the count of conspiracy to commit obstruction of justice, he read. We find the defendant Preston Grant guilty on the count of aggravated assault. Guilty on the count of wire fraud. Guilty. The word guilty rang out 21 times, once for each boy on every single charge. Preston's mother let out a wail in the front row. Mayor Grant, sitting in handcuffs in the back, just put his head in his hands. Judge Harlan looked at the boys. I am setting a sentencing hearing for next week. But let me be clear. You used your privilege as a weapon. You thought you were above the law. You are about to find out just how heavy the law can be. Bail is revoked. Remand to custody immediately. The bailiffs moved in. The click of handcuffs echoed through the room. I watched them being led away. Preston looked back. Our eyes met. He didn't look angry. He looked small. He looked like a boy who realized too late that he wasn't the main character of the world. I felt Dad's hand on my shoulder. It's done, he whispered. I took a deep breath. The air in the courtroom didn't smell stale anymore. It smelled like rain. It smelled like it was finally over. But as we walked out, I knew there was one more thing to do. The money, the corrupt millions they had stolen. Dad had a plan for that too. The sentencing hearing was held 3 weeks later. The leaves on the trees outside the courthouse had turned a violent shade of red, matching the mood in the town. The courtroom was even fuller than before. But this time, the atmosphere was different. There was no whispering, no speculation. Just a heavy, suffocating dread coming from the defense table. Preston, Kyle, and Mason were broad and wearing orange jumpsuits. They were shackled at the wrists and ankles. The arrogance that had defined them for years, the varsity jackets, the fast cars, the sneers had been stripped away, leaving them looking like what they were. Scared children facing the consequences of adult crimes. Judge Harlan didn't waste time. He read the sentencing guidelines with a monotone voice that made the words sound even more final. Preston Grant, he said, looking over his glasses. You were the ringleader. You used your father's position to terrorize a young woman. You orchestrated a cover-up. You showed no remorse until you were caught. Preston stood up, his legs shaking so hard the chains rattled. I sentence you to 15 years in federal prison, the judge said. With no possibility of parole for the first 12, Preston's knees buckled. He collapsed back into his chair, sobbing. His mother screamed. A raw animal sound that echoed off the mahogany walls. Kyle Vance, the judge continued. 10 years. Mason Reed, 8 years. It was a massacre. But the judge wasn't done. He turned his attention to the back of the room where former Mayor Grant and the developer, Mr. Reed, were sitting in a holding cell watching their sons be destroyed. And as for the parents, Judge Harlan said, his voice dropping to a growl. Your trials are separate, but let this be a preview. The federal government is seizing all assets connected to the RICO predicate acts. That means the homes, the cars, the offshore accounts, the land intended for the resort. He banged his gavel. Court is adjourned. As the bailiffs led the boys away, I didn't feel joy. I didn't feel happy. I felt light. The weight that had been crushing my chest for months was finally gone. Dad walked me out of the courthouse. The reporters were shouting questions, but we ignored them. We got into the back of the black SUV where Mom was waiting. She looked tired, but she was smiling. It's over, she said, taking my hand. Not quite, Dad said, looking at the driver. Take us to the bank. The bank? I asked. Why? Because justice isn't just about prison, Dad said. It's about restoration. We drove to the First National Bank downtown. The manager was waiting for us at the door, looking nervous. Dad walked in like he owned the place, which given the federal seizure orders, he practically did. We sat in a conference room. The manager slid a piece of paper across the table to me. What is this? I asked. It's a check, the manager said. From the Asset Forfeit Fund. When the government seized the developer illegal profits, a portion was allocated for victim restitution. I looked at the number. It was staggering. $2 million. This is their money, I whispered. It was their money, Dad corrected. Now it's your future. I looked at the check, then at Dad. I don't want it. I don't want their dirty money. It's not dirty anymore, Dad said gently. It's been scrubbed and you aren't going to spend it on cars or clothes. You're going to use it to make sure this never happens again. You pulled out a folder. I've already drawn up the paperwork. The Lila Foundation, a legal defense fund for victims of assault in small towns who can't afford to fight back against corrupt systems. I looked at the paperwork. The Lila Foundation. You want me to run it? I asked. I want you to lead it. Dad said, you have a voice now, Lila. You took down a mayor. You took down a dynasty. People will listen to you. I looked at the check again. I thought about all the other girls in towns like this. Girls who didn't have a general for a father. Girls who were silenced, shamed, and broken by powerful men. I picked up the pen. Okay, I said, let's do it. But the reckoning wasn't just financial. That evening, Dad drove me to one last location, the high school. It was empty. The football field was dark, but the bulldozers were there. Not the developers, bulldozers, ours. What's happening? I asked. The town council, the new town council, voted to demolish the old bleachers. Dad said, they're building a new student center, a safe space, and they're naming it after you. I watched as the massive yellow machine roared to life. The metal claw reached out and grabbed the wooden stands, the place where my nightmare had begun. With a sickening crunch, it tore the wood apart. Splinters flew. The structure collapsed into a pile of rubble. I watched it fall, and as the dust settled, I realized that the ghost of that night was gone. The physical place where it happened didn't exist anymore. It was just dirt, just ground. I looked at Dad. He was watching me, his face illuminated by the headlights of the bulldozer. Thank you, I whispered. You did this, Lila, he said. I just provided the logistics. You provided the courage. You put his arm around me. Now, let's go home. I think Mom is making dinner. And for the first time in 20 years, I don't have to go back to base. You're staying? I asked, hope blooming in my chest. I retired this morning, he said, pulling a folded letter out of his pocket. Effective immediately. My war is over. My new mission is right here. We stood there for a moment longer, watching the wreckage of the past being cleared away to make room for the future. The months that followed the demolition of the old bleachers were strange. For so long, my life had been defined by a single moment of violence. Then it was defined by the war we waged to fix it. Now for the first time, the silence in our house wasn't heavy. It was peaceful. The town changed too. It was slow at first. With the mayor in federal prison, and the police department under new management, a tough, no-nonsense woman from Chicago named Chief Harper, the fear that had suffocated everyone began to lift. The Grant dynasty was dead. The statues of the mayor's grandfather in the park were quietly removed by the city council. But the biggest change was in me. I sat on the front porch of our house watching the sunset. It was late autumn now. The air was crisp and smelled of wood smoke. Dad walked out holding 2 mugs of hot chocolate. He had traded his tactical vest for a flannel shirt, but he still walked with that same military precision. He sat down on the swing next to me. You're thinking too loud, he said, handing me a mug. I can hear the gears turning. I smiled, wrapping my hands around the warm ceramic. I was just thinking about the foundation. We got our first letter today. Oh, Dad asked. From who? A girl in Texas, I said. Her school tried to suspend her for reporting a teacher. Her dad is a mechanic and they can't afford a lawyer. She saw my interview on the news. Dad looked at me, his blue eyes serious. And what did you do? I authorized the funds, I said. And I sent our legal team to Texas. They land tomorrow morning. Dad nodded slowly, a look of immense pride spreading across his face. That's my girl. You aren't just surviving anymore, Lila. You're hunting. You're hunting injustice. I learned from the best, I said, leaning my head on his shoulder. We sat there for a while just watching the orange and purple streaks in the sky. A year ago, I was a broken girl shivering in the mud, thinking my life was over. I thought I was trash. I thought I was nothing. But I wasn't nothing. I was the daughter of a general. And more importantly, I was a survivor who had turned her scars into a shield for others. Dad, I asked softly. Yeah, kiddo. Do you think they'll ever come back? The fear, the nightmares. Dad took a sip of his cocoa. He didn't lie to me. He never did. The memories won't go away, Leia. They're part of you now. But they don't own you. You own them. They are just reminders of what you survive. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. I have something for you, he said. I opened it. Inside wasn't jewelry. It was a pin. A small golden pin in the shape of a phoenix rising from ashes. The team wanted you to have this, he said. Major Thompson said, you earned your rank. I ran my thumb over the gold wings. I pinned it to my jacket right over my heart. I love it, I whispered. Mom came out onto the porch, then wiping her hands on a dish towel. She looked younger, too. The lines of worry that had etched her face for years were softening. Dinner is ready, she said, smiling at the two of us. But before we eat, look at the street. I looked up. A black car was driving slowly past our house. It wasn't an FBI agent. It wasn't a threat. It was Mrs. Reed, Mason's mother, the wife of the developer who had tried to ruin us. She stopped the car for a second. She looked at us on the porch. She didn't wave. She just nodded, a small, humble acknowledgement of defeat and respect. Then she drove on. They know, Dad said quietly. They all know this is your town now, Leia. I stood up, feeling the cool wind on my face. I wasn't afraid of the dark anymore. No, I said, looking at my parents, the army that had saved me. It's our town. We walked inside together, closing the door on the past and turning on the lights for the future. Wow, what a journey. From the darkness behind the school to the steps of the courthouse, Leia and her father showed us that no matter how powerful the enemy is, the truth backed by a little military firepower always wins. Now, I have a question for you, and I want you to be honest. If you were in the general's shoes, if you had that power, would you have stopped at the courtroom or would you have taken a darker path of revenge? Let me know in the comments. I read every single one. And hey, I see you watching from all over the world. Represent your home. Comment your city or country below so I can see how far our Betrayal Stories Lab family has grown. If this story made your heart race, or if you just love seeing justice served cold, please do me a huge favor. Hit that like button gently and subscribe. It helps us bring more of these epic tales to you.